Welcome to Echoes of Newton Falls, a podcast brought to you from the Newton Falls Public Library. I'm Kim Gonzalez, the local history librarian.
And I'm Ashley Grimwood, the reference associate.
On Echoes of Newton Falls, we're going to talk about everything related to Newton Falls local history, from the covered bridge, canals, and important families. Let's get into it. We have a special guest joining us today, Adreanne Foos. Some of you might recognize her name. She wrote Images of America, Newton Falls, and leads a lot of our local history walks here at the library. She actually led one just a couple weeks ago on the history of downtown.
Adreanne came to the library in May to give a presentation about her book, and we thought having her on would be a great chance for those of you who couldn't be here for that in person to still hear Adreanne talk about her book. Before we get into it, we wanted Adreanne to read her excerpt from her book.
The Du Bois Mansion was built between 1838 and 1842 by Dr. Henry A. Du Bois. The piece of land on which the house was built was owned by his father, Cornelius Du Bois. Dr. Henry Du Bois also built the Butts Mansion for his father, but upon Cornelius's inspection of the home, he was unhappy and asked his son to build another one. The location of the mansion was on a piece of land spanning between North Center Street, East Franklin Street, and Division Street, near the east branch of the Mahoning River, the Lake Erie, Alliance, and Wheeling Railroad rail line, and the Baltimore and Ohio rail line. Many residents of Newton Falls in the 19th and 20th centuries told stories of the Du Bois home and property. These stories told tales of the mansion being haunted, but it was never proven. Soon these stories turned into legends. Dr. Du Bois was deemed a mad scientist and was accused of luring unsuspecting victims into his home to perform experiments on them. The Du Bois Mansion burned in 1904, 3 years before the paper mill burned down, in which Cornelius owned.
Thank you so much for reading that. So why is that like one of your favorites?
That is one of my favorites because I just love the legend of the haunted mansion. I think it's really interesting, and I think it really brings people together telling stories like that, especially of their hometown. I remember telling it around the table at the lunch table at school, and it was just a really fun legend that we would all, sort of get into and try to tell scary stories to each other.
Yeah, that's very cool. I remember doing kind of the same thing back in Houston, like, the spooky house, right, on the block. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in Newton Falls, and my dad also grew up here, and my grandmother, his mom, grew up in this area as well. So we go back to the beginning of the 20th century here, my family. My grandfather came from Czechoslovakia and met my grandmother here, and they got married. So they were here forever. They were married over 60 years. So we just have been here for a long time, which is really cool. And I graduated from Newton Falls High School in 2008. And I recently moved from the area. I live in Warren now, but Newton Falls holds a really special place in my heart.
That's awesome. And you're still, not too far away, right?
Not too far, 20 minutes or so, yeah. And my parents still live here, so I always come and visit pretty often.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm from Warren too, so 20 minutes.
Not bad at all.
Very cool. So have you always been into history?
I've always been into history. I've really enjoyed it since I was a kid. My dad would actually take me around town and show me the old buildings and tell me that this used to be this business at one point. This was this when I was a kid. He really got me interested in that, and I'm really thankful for that because I've just always been interested in finding out about local history, and I think it's really important to know what was there before us. That's really important. So he really was my inspiration to get into that. I had a really great history teacher in school named Mr. Stom, and he also was a huge inspiration to me. He was a great history teacher. He taught me so much, and I really give him a lot of credit as well.
Yeah, I believe he comes into the library.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's really
wife,
cool.
Yeah.
He's super cool.
Did you go to college for this?
Yes. So I went to Kent State and I graduated with a history degree in United States history. And that was my primary focus when I was in college. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book as well.
Cool. So it's not just like local Newton Falls history. It's just overall history too that you're interested in.
Yeah. I love anything with the Revolution, and I love the history of United States presidents, anything that's U.S. history related. That I really love. That's my passion for sure. The Civil War, the Revolution, presidents, histories, conspiracies about the presidents, stuff like that.
So why did you decide to write your book?
Well, when I was in high school, I always joked around with my friends and said, I'm going to write a pictorial history. I had Ella's version, the orange book. Many of you might be familiar with it. It's humongous and has so much information in it. So I always said, I'm going to continue that because it ended around 1977. I said it didn't even, have anything about the tornado in it. So I said, I think that's really important to add that. That was one of the biggest reasons why. And it was sort of a joke, and I would say, yeah, I'm going to write this. And I never thought it would come to fruition. I would just always say that I wanted to do that. So I want to say maybe 4 years ago, I said, I'm going to do this. This is something I've wanted to do. I'm really passionate about it. And there wasn't an Images of America for Newton Falls. They have them for Kent, they have them for Akron, all the surrounding, they have them for Warren, all the surrounding cities. And I said, Newton Falls is too good. It has so much history to not have a book about it. So that was one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to write a book, to just continue on from Ella's and to have that, legacy of that, to honor Ella and what she wrote and to add it onto, what she already had. So that was one of the biggest reasons why.
Yeah, it's nice because we called out that one the bread and butter.
Yes.
Yeah.
But now we have this one too
It's huge. Yeah. I'm so thankful. She was so detailed in everything that she wrote. So I actually got a lot of my information from there because she was just she just sat down. I feel like she sat down and wrote, even minutes to some of the meetings that, if you look at how detailed she was about it, it was really interesting. So that was one of the biggest reasons. And also to let readers know also about the tornado, because that was really important as well. That was, Ella's book was pre-tornado and this is post-tornado. So I think that was one of the biggest reasons why, just to continue on that legacy.
Big part of Newton Falls history.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So that was just kind of missing. And I said, you know what, I'm going to, pick up where Ella left off and, honor her legacy with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you even led a tornado walk, right? A couple years ago.
I did. Yeah, it was the 40th anniversary of the tornado. That would have been last year. And it was actually May 31st, 2025, which would have been the 40th anniversary of that. So we actually went around town and saw a lot of the buildings that were still here that had the damage and things like that. And we just, talked about, what was there before and, how the National Guard came in and how chaotic it was. I mean, I didn't even live through it, but I've heard so many stories of it. So I just feel like I told that to the best of my ability with all the info that I had.
My mom was pregnant with me when it happened.
Oh, wow.
And she lived in Niles.
Wow.
Which was, I think,
Niles got hit pretty hard
too. Yeah.
Yeah, Niles was crazy.
So I hear her stories about it because I think the place she lived in got damaged.
Oh my
and she
gosh.
lost a whole bunch of childhood photos and yearbooks and stuff like that. So
that's crazy. My mom actually was living in Niles at the time as well. That's interesting. And my sister was 6 months old. My oldest sister was about 6. I wasn't born yet, so I wasn't here. So I just heard the stories. So.
Wow. Yeah, moving into the area, I heard about specifically Niles because that's where we first lived near when we moved here. But so when I heard that, and I think in the Niles Mall, they have a timeline of what happened and everything.
They do, yes.
Yeah. And so that was, wow. Yeah.
I think, is that where all the casualties happened, I think? Most of them?
There were casualties in Niles. I don't know specifically, but I know Newton Falls didn't have any. There were a lot of injuries, a ton of injuries, but thankfully we didn't have any casualties. I know Niles unfortunately did.
Yeah.
Now Niles also, I know this isn't Newton Falls, but it's just interesting with the tornado. There's a huge cemetery in Niles Vienna Road. And I remember my parents saying that the gravestones came up from the ground.
Wow. Because
of the tornado. I couldn't even imagine cleaning that. That was crazy. So I don't know. I don't think that happened here, but that huge cemetery, tombstones were just pulled out of the ground from the harsh winds and everything. Couldn't imagine that. That'd be so freaky.
What was the process when writing your book? Did you have a specific order you did things in, or?
Yeah, so I actually contacted Arcadia Publishing. That's who published my book. And if people don't know about that, I'll just give a little background of that. So Arcadia chooses, you can apply to be an author through Arcadia. And they actually want people that are up and coming. You don't necessarily have to be a published author to apply. I was not. I just, had such a passion for local history. I decided I'll apply. So the process of that was I had to fill out about a 10-page application. I had to submit photographs, and I had to submit evidence that, that I would follow through with this. They really wanted people to take it seriously. So I remember coming into the library, I had to pick out some photos. I had to send some. I had to do a little background of Newton Falls. I had to do a background about myself. So that was the whole process of starting the book, just that 10-page application. After a few weeks of review, I got approved, and then that's when they reached out to me and they started explaining. They were like so helpful every step of the way. It was amazing. It was a really good experience. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in writing about like your hometown, if it's not already done, definitely reach out, and that'd be a really good experience for sure. So anyway, they sent me a layout. Now the whole entire book, as many of you have probably seen, it's a lot of images with captions. So the point of these books is you want to have about 200 images. So I had to settle about 200 images. That was really hard because I wanted to add so much more. And I even have said I need to do a part 2 because there was so much that I had to leave out. So I picked about 200 images, and I think like the final number was like around 188 or something like that. And I had to write captions for that. Now you had to number each photo and each caption, and it was probably about a 20-page layout, and you had to say this picture is going to go here, number 1, number 2. The coolest part of it though was picking out the cover. I got to pick out an image for the cover. I submitted several, and they, approved this one, which was of the downtown, which I thought was really interesting. So on the inside of the book, I actually got to write about the picture on the cover. So it just says on the cover, and it has a little excerpt from there. And then you got to also pick out a photo of just any photo that you wanted to be on the front page, which I thought this was the old Falls Steel and Tube, and it's now the distillery now. So that building is there now. Across the street, the factory isn't there anymore. That was Falls Steel and Tube, and that was also Sport Masters at one time and Tonneau Masters, like in the 90s and 2000s. They made like tarps for trucks. So, but anyway, that whole process was about an 8-month process of me coming into the library, picking out images, looking through old Newton Falls Herald papers. And it was a long process, but it was really fun. And I had to submit all my photos and all the steps, every step of the way. But like I said, it was a really easy process of them, approving, or denying or saying this, we want a different photo, So, but I think the biggest thing, what they said when I was researching, is just try to encompass the whole town. And they asked me, what do you want to focus on, what years? So I said, obviously the early history of it, through the tornado. I'm going to add some elements of current, present day and things like that. So that was the whole process. And I simplify it just because I don't want to, I digress. But, there was a lot of just time and writing and a lot of research, but I thought it was so worth it and so fun. At times it was really daunting, but I'm really glad that I have this, as the end result now.
That's awesome. So how did you pick the pictures? I know you said it was very hard, and
well, I was pretty biased because, my family grew up here. So I, went to my dad, and I went to some relatives and some friends of his, and I just started to make a list. I said, what were the most important things when you were growing up that I can highlight in this book? And they were telling me about certain businesses, which I have a whole, the whole section of the business section in here is probably the biggest, because Newton Falls had so much industry at one time. So I really just wanted to highlight, what Newton Falls was at one point. And so I really tried to hyper focus on the industry, what was here before. And I think a lot of people are very nostalgic. I think they really like to look at old photographs. And so I feel like that was the biggest thing. I have a lot of, old school photographs in here, some old football teams of Newton Falls. So that was my biggest thing. I really wanted to capture that nostalgia of, people looking at photos that they can relate to and say, I remember that, I remember when. So that was my biggest thing. And then also I talked to the local history librarian at the time, and she wasn't from here, but she helped, just kind of guide. I would say, yeah, I want this. And she would find that for me, which was really helpful. So that was also really helpful. But, that's why I really wanted to just focus in on, like the industry. That was the biggest thing because, Newton Falls had, a lot of businesses at one time. And, so just outlining it like in the table of contents of my book, I really just wanted to go, from as early as possible. So talking about the Connecticut Western Reserve, which was, the piece of land owned by the state of Connecticut. And we had some Indian tribes here as well, which was really interesting that, they made a path to the salt springs in Lordstown. So, I write about that and, where the word Mahoning comes from. That's an Indian word. So that also, it means salt lick. So that's, really interesting with, the salt springs for sure. So I really also thought, when I was growing up, I was really interested in the canal that ran here. And, we had so many, we had a lot of railroads in town as well. So I really picked photographs that highlighted the old canal and old railroads. And then I think obviously one of the biggest pieces of history is the covered bridge that we have. So I said, why not add that to that? No, but, so the covered bridge was really important. Obviously we have, different neighborhoods in Newton Falls that people really don't know about. We have a section that was called Arlington Heights. There was a school called Arlington Elementary, which I attended when I was a kid. And there was also a place called Earlville, and there was a family with the last name Earl, and they also built some mills in the area as well. So so that's why I wanted to add a lot about the downtown and the covered bridges. We had a lot of mills, and we had we have 2 dams on both of branches of the Mahoning River. And we also were affected by the flood of 1913, so I decided to add that in. Like I mentioned, a lot about businesses and industry. There were a lot of businesses at one point, a lot of factories. And also the community center is really important. That has to deal with the arsenal. So I know the arsenal is in Ravenna, but the arsenal had such a big impact on Newton Falls, I decided to add, photographs of that and the arsenal being built, which that's pretty rare because I feel like the arsenal is so secret. You don't really get to see pictures. So when I found pictures of the arsenal, I said, I have to add those in. Obviously the public schools in the area, that was important to add. Because the high school was destroyed by the tornado and we rebuilt in 85, and that's a huge, piece of our history as well. So I have, the old high school, the old elementary school in here. There's a lot of notable people that lived in Newton Falls as well. And there were a lot of great houses at one point. And then, of course, the last section of my book encompasses the tornado. So all of that just being said, those are all the photographs that I decided to choose just because of, I just thought they were really relevant to the town's history. And like I mentioned earlier, just adding on to what Ella wrote in her book.
What was your favorite part, writing or the research?
I would say I really enjoyed looking through a lot of the old Newton Falls Herald newspapers. That was one of my favorite parts of researching. I really enjoyed researching about the Du Bois Mansion. That's really interesting. And I also just loved, I love canals and railroads. That's another passion of mine. So I really loved researching about the old canal and the railroads that went through. And it's interesting because there was a lock on the canal. And it was I think it was Lock 22, I believe it was called. And we also had an aqueduct in town. And there were only 2 aqueducts on the whole entire 83-mile long canal.
Wow. So
we actually housed one of those aqueducts across the east branch of the Mahoning River. And so that was always really interesting to me. And I really enjoyed researching that as well. So we also have a road in town called Lock Street, and that is where the lock actually was in town. It's over actually around near where the Du Bois Mansion was.
So where was the Du Bois Mansion? You said it was near Lock Street.
It was on a piece of land that was in between. Let me read it here so that way I have it. The location of the mansion was on a piece of land spanning between North Center Street, East Franklin Street, and Division Street near the East Branch of the Mahoning River. So that was sort of where the distillery is now. It was sort of behind there in those woods. And it, my dad, when he was little, he said they would go and it wasn't there anymore. It burned in 1904, but you could still see the remains, the foundation. Yeah. And they would go and just explore it and look at it. You could get back there back then. Now I think there's a couple trails you can get back there, but there's a lot of woods now for sure. And then he owned a paper mill that was also on that branch of the Mahoning River as well.
Okay.
Is there anything in your book about the Newton Falls Public Library?
Yes. So there's actually an excerpt in here about how the former high school housed the library. And the high school was actually built in 1922. The library was established in 1930.
And we found out the groundbreaking was in 84.
Yeah.
And we opened in 88.
So at our current location.
The current location, yep.
There was a home here, the Mattis home, which we actually have a couple of artifacts from the home. Glass,
like a window pane.
That we have our technical services area. And I think there was a chandelier or smaller chandelier that we have somewhere. Oh, wow. That was from the house. But
I do think one of our future episodes will be about the Mattis family.
Yeah, because she was a librarian
here.
Yep. Yeah.
Mildred Mattis. Wow. And her brother was the principal and superintendent of Newton Falls schools, and his wife, Leah, was a teacher.
Mm-hmm. What was one of your favorite things to research?
I really enjoyed researching about Scott Vassbinder. Now, downtown in Newton Falls, Scott was he was a police officer in Newton Falls. And downtown next to the municipal building, there's an alleyway, and it's called Vassbinder Way. They named it after Vassbinder, but he was actually shot while he was on duty. He was only 42, but he was trying to catch these 3 burglars, and they shot him in the abdomen. He was transferred to what is now Trumbull Memorial Hospital, which is not even there anymore. And he actually died at the hospital there. But, to honor his legacy, which was only 3 years on the police force, which is crazy. He left behind 4 children and his wife at only 42. They honored him by adding the alleyway sign that's called Vassbinder Way right next to the police station and municipal building. So even though that's a tragic story, I feel like it's also part of Newton Falls' past, and it really needs to be talked about, and we need to remember his legacy and what he left behind. Those burglars that were eventually caught and warned, and they were sentenced to death, and they got the electric chair for robbery and for killing Vassbinder.
Did you research anything about Charles Tickner? Because I've done the letters, and I feel like we could do a whole podcast on him too.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I didn't, but I feel like that'd be so interesting.
Yeah, he was in World War II, and so he has letters written to his brother and his sister-in-law. And there's also a lady that he met in England, Jean Cook, who was writing letters after he passed away to the brother and sister-in-law. So a lot of there's just a lot of interesting to read from that time period, and all of those are also available online through. Yeah, all the letters are all transcribed and everything too online. That's but awesome. It's some of the language is funny. Like there's some things that he says that are just wow.
And we also have Tickner Avenue.
Yes.
Just assuming that's named after him, which is really interesting.
I actually saw it was named, I had a question come in. It was actually already named Tickner Avenue in 1928. I saw it on some of the Sanborn maps. Wow. So my guess from his family did have land on that street. So I'm guessing it was named, back in the day how they did names were a lot of times who lived there. Right.
A lot of streets in Newton Falls, you have like Cale Adams and, how like young, you know, they were named after who lived on either side of the road, which is really interesting.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that's also what happened with Tickner Avenue, because someone asked like, oh, was it named after him after he passed away? And I found surprisingly, no, it was already Tickner. Yep.
And that's the same in Warren. There's so many roads that are named after people that live there, which is really interesting. So we have a lot of those in town as well.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on and joining us today. Really, it means a lot to us that you took time out of your day to come out here and talk to us about your book.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys doing this. I'm really excited to get local history out to, you know, everybody through, you know, this type of media through the podcast. Through podcasts, I think it'll be really great for people to listen to and to learn at the same time. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today we wanted to highlight our local history photos. So as Adrianne was talking about them earlier, you can find a link to those photos that have been digitized on our website. Go to the Newton Falls Public Library, and there should be a link on the front page. And you can also find them by going to the local history tab. We also want to mention some upcoming events at the library. On Monday, July 27th at 6 p.m., Barb Petrowski from the Portage County chapter of the Ohio Genealogical Society will be here to give a presentation on homes and families that were displaced to construct the Ravenna Arsenal. Visit our website or call to register.
We are also continuing a history book club, not just focused on America 250 anymore. It's just all of American history or world history or general history. Our first book is for August, on August 17th at 6 p.m., and we're doing The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Gran. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you for listening.